Welcome to the Speaking of Writers podcast, the podcast where we explore the stories behind the storytellers. Today's guest, Wayne Lynch, author of the dark and psychologically rich novel Blood-Stained Papers, blending vampire lore with journalism, guilt, redemption, and undying love. Blood-Stained Papers reimagines immortality not as a gift, but as a curse that leaves deep emotional scars. Written by a man with more than 4 decades of experience in broadcast journalism, the novel follows reporters whose lives and humanity are shattered when they're drawn into a centuries-old blood feud between powerful immortals. Wayne Lynch is a retired journalist living in Seattle, Washington, 43 years of experience both in front of and behind the camera. He's also the author of the nonfiction book Season of the 76ers, originally published by St. Martin's Press, and a former university professor of news and public relations writing. Happy to have Wayne Lynch join me now here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So, Bloodstained Papers, Wayne, blends vampire mythology with journalism in a very grounded, human way. Where did this story first begin for you?
Well, I was when many kids in their from 8 to 15 are looking at war movies and war stories and cowboy movies, and science fiction was big in the mid 50s after the atomic testing. But vampires were my favorite, and I used to watch all of the Friday night and Saturday night late movies that come on at midnight, and the original Frankenstein, the original Dracula, the original Wolfman, and the vampire thing really caught my attention. My mother allowed me to get a subscription to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine,
Hmm.
which was very big in the late 50s, early 60s, and would preview some of the horror movies coming out. And that's where I learned the top 10 things that vampires can do. And that really started me going. And the movie stuff, I loved all the Hammer films that came out in the late 50s with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing leading Dracula and Frankenstein and all of those stories. And it just stuck with me. And then when I became a reporter, I always had this idea in the back of my mind that it would be interesting to create a story where reporters who are normally chasing stories, you may remember the Night Stalker, Kolchak, with Darren McGavin
Yes.
back on the old TV days. He was a reporter chasing monsters, but I wanted to make the reporters into monsters. So being a reporter and being a crime reporter in a city that was really had the mean streets, Baltimore, it kind of stayed with me that I want to try to do this and put a story together where the reporters are the focus, not necessarily all the guys with the fangs,
Yeah.
the traditional vampires that open up the casket and here we go again.
Yeah, all of
So
your
that was
main
the origin of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of the main characters are journalists or media professionals. How did your own 43-year career in broadcasting shape the way you built this world?
Well, I always felt that when I was a reporter doing what we call packages, you'd go out and do a minute 130 or 2 minute or whatever it happened to be. And I love to tell the stories instead of just reciting the facts. I wanted to build kind of a framework for how the story was being told. So it would be much more memorable, much more visual, much more gritty, yet also okay, not over the top gritty.
Hmm.
Uh, so it was really, all these years of covering bad, violent crime and knowing so many police officers in Baltimore City. That's why one of the motivating things in this movie are the centuries old vampire who wants to have revenge against police. So my enjoyment of working with police, knowing their faults, knowing their problems, knowing the pressures, I just felt that we had a reporter, vampire, police triangle going. And that was sort of the origin of the stories.
Yeah, your vampires aren't romanticized immortals. They're tormented, manipulated, and haunted too. What did you want to do differently from the traditional vampire stories?
Yes, it was definitely an attempt to find a new way to tell the story, something that stands apart from the traditional vampire novels and movies. There are always human beings in it, and there always seem to be vampire hunters. I wanted to find a dichotomy of a vampire who becomes a vampire hunter and a TV reporter who is thought to be a vampire, but then tricks his own master and becomes a vampire hunter of his own. So there's a lot of circular motion going on there between the reporters, both the newspaper guy who's the main character, Abe, and the other character who's named Sloan. And if I may say, some of my characters' names are Mina and Abe, which are basically from the Stoker novel, Mina Harker and Abraham Van Helsing. And Vance Sloan was a takeoff on Edward Van Sloan, who played Van Helsing in Lugosi's Dracula in 1931. So I tried to tie movies into this story as well. In fact, I mentioned a couple of movies in the narrative that affected me and wound up being a preview of what was going to happen at the end. So the whole movie thing I talked about, the reporting thing I talked about, it all kind of came to fruition in that tale that finally coalesced.
Yeah, Wayne, let's talk about Abe and Mina for a moment. Abe begins as a newsman, becomes a pawn in a centuries-old feud. How did you approach writing his loss of humanity while still keeping him sympathetic too?
Well, I wanted to try to create a narrative of I guess it's kind of a standard good versus evil, and then who wins out in the end. It's guilt, the guilty conscience, perhaps overwhelmed by the good conscience. And it's a tug of war, it's a hand wringer. I want to do this, but I don't want to do this. They're making me do this. I don't really want to do this. They're making me kill. But I still have a sliver, and that's the word I use throughout the book, a sliver of humanity left. And the other reporter, the TV reporter, works with Abe to try to turn him. He feels there's a kernel of conscience there, a kernel of goodness. So he persuades him, stay with me, stay with me, stay with me. And so the end of the book is sort of, well, will good triumph after all? Will these two guys come through and help Mina to recover herself and maybe themselves? So that was the nature of those three. One reporter who really goes bad, well, he was kind of there's always a real one bad guy in some of these movies
Yeah.
and stories, and he went from being a little wacky, a little unstable to a degree, into real depravity, which I thought was also important to the book. You got to have somebody who kind of doesn't make it all the way back.
Now, Mina isn't just a love interest. She's central to the idea of salvation. What does her character represent in a world ruled by monsters?
She is trying to be resistant, and the master vampire is trying to allow her to do that by keeping her from completely turning into a vampire and starting to feed on people or whatever. He wants to save her for himself. And he prolongs the agony for a long time, basically slowly draining her sustenance, but never completely taking her over. And because of that, she also has this resistance. There's a scene in the book where Abe comes and tries to get some clues from Mina. Where is your master? How can we find him? She doesn't want to tell him, but gradually, after he works and works with her, she finally gives him the clue that basically leads to the culminating feud and culminating clash between the two masters. One master trying to kill the other, and the other one really trying to kill humans. So it was again kind of a contrast in styles there and contrast in mission.
The story opens during Holy Week and builds toward an unholy climax. How intentional was the religious symbolism woven throughout this book?
Well, as I mentioned in the book, I grew up a devout young Catholic boy. Um, there's a line in the book about communion, confirmation, the cross, three C's. And I was totally involved in the faith. I was actually a commentator in eighth grade, leading the congregation in their responses. So I was up on the pulpit in a cassock and surplice, almost looking like an altar boy. And it was something that I thought is always going to be present in a vampire movie or story because of the cross. The cross is always the ultimate weapon. And if you look back at anything that Hammer has done or the Coppola movie, you remember that in the Coppola movie, Vlad was basically also a devout religious acolyte of God. And when he felt God betrayed him, then he became what he was. So that religious thing is always there. And I wanted to include it by saying, hey, I grew up this way. So maybe that had a little bit of an impact on my conscience as the book evolved. And I wanted that to be present. So, well, why does he all of a sudden want to be this? Well, he grew up Catholic and he was a devout kid, you know?
Yes. You've
That
written
makes
both.
sense.
Yes. You've written both nonfiction and fiction. What creative freedoms or challenges did fiction give you that journalism never could?
Yeah, I think it allowed me to reach out to areas that I never tried to write before. I can write a crime uh, TV story, but this was a crime story that gave me a lot more latitude to go deeper into how these things occur, and that was very important to me. Um, I talk about the fact that morality is very much subjective for a lot of people. It comes and goes. It fades. It drops, then it rises again. So I think that was a part of it. I think that was a real part of it. I think reporting uh, basically prompted me to begin to tell stories. But I'll mention the other book briefly. I wrote a book about the 1967 NBA champions, and I wrote it in storytelling form. How did these guys come together? What motivated them to become great? What happened at the end when things kind of fell apart after their great victories? So there's a typical story arc. You think you got it. Yeah, I got it. Then you don't have it,
Mm.
and you lose it at the end. But in this case, I think I tried to create a triumphant approach to the ending, at least. I don't want to give it a spoiler alert, but it was truly a battle between good and evil at the end, and that's where it had to go.
As a former professor and writing trainer, did your teaching experience influence how you structured or edited this novel?
Well, the attention I paid to sentence construction, are the commas right? Are there sometimes double quotations? A single quotation framed with a double quotation.
Hmm.
Where were the periods and commas? Was I using the Oxford? I don't even remember now. It's the Oxford comma. So I think that my attention to detail was very important. And I didn't write this with an outline or a cast of characters. I sat down in June of 24 and just started to tell a story. And I based it on a crime that I covered in April of 1976 that started this whole thing, a real life crime that you can read about in the Baltimore Sun. You can read about it in Google. And that was a great impetus to not just come up with something out of whole cloth, but to take an event that I was there. I saw the bullets ricocheting off the street when I was reporting for the TV station. So that made it very easy to go back there and launch the story.
Mm. Wayne, when readers finish the last page of Bloodstained Papers, what do you hope lingers with them the most?
Hope that no matter how bad things look, there can be some kind of a path back. And I structured the end of the book so that I could write another one, Steve. I want to try to sequel this. At the end of the book, there's a movement to another part of the country where I live now to try to continue this story on with all of the characters except Jonathan, the bad guy, the depraved one. But I've tried to create a story where everybody kind of, I hate to use this in vampire terms, but resurrects, comes back from the dead, so to speak, to live again and try something new. But will they? That's the question.
Yes, you mentioned the word hope. You mentioned you were a devout Catholic too growing up, and I remember talking to a Catholic priest many years ago, and he said to me, "The triumph of hope, the triumph
And
of hope."
I remembered that, and it I guess I would have to say the faith has taken it's taken a beating because of some things that have happened in real life. And we don't need to get into that now, but it has compromised some of our feelings. But when you're 8 years old and you open that first prayer book and you're kneeling down at the communion rail, there's something, I don't know, it's just an incredible belief of faith. And I really tried to keep that alive inside the novel. And it's based in Baltimore, if I may, Steve. But it's not necessarily something you have to be in Baltimore to read. There are some incredible locales in this book, like Lincoln Park, where there's a murder mansion because of so many bodies that have been left there. That's crime. There's this Greenmount Cemetery where John Wilkes Booth is buried, and Enoch Pratt, the founder of the Pratt Library, which is a well-known, globally known, and even the publisher of the Baltimore Sun is buried there. Another reporter connection.
Mhm.
So you don't have to be from Baltimore to love it because it takes you through. And I have pictures in the book that carry the reader through the locations, so they're not like, well, where is this place? What is this thing? So I hope that helped as well.
Well, if you're looking for a vampire story that goes far beyond blood and fangs and instead explores the emotional and psychological cost of immortality, this is one you won't want to miss. You can find Bloodstained Papers wherever books are sold now. He is Wayne Lynch, the author. Thank you for joining me.
Steve, it's been a pleasure. Good luck to you. I love your website. I've read a bunch of good books now because of it. So success to you. Keep it going, man.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching and for listening to the Speaking of Writers podcast. Like it, share it, subscribe to it, write a review, and I will talk to you again next time.